Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of the Nickel Press Show. We are on week 8 now. We are talking waiver wire start sets and sort of recapping week 7. I'm your host as usual, Doug Moore. I'm a member over at the Nickel Press. I'm also a writer for Razzball. Without Mario this week, but I'm joined by Joe Juan over at Number Fire. So Joe, glad to have you here. How are you?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me on. Very excited to be here.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to have you on. And, you write over at Number Fire. They have really good writers over there. So obviously, you being there, obviously, must make you already smarter than I am. But I just try. I put up a good act. So, like I said, we are without Mario this week. You and me, but we will definitely touch on everything fantasy football relevant. Sort of start with a recap of week 7, and as I wrote for my article in Razzball that came up today, obviously the big piece of news: another star running back went down this past weekend, and it was kind of a gruesome one when you think about it. That's Arian Foster. Now he came back, I think it was week 4, after having groin surgery in the preseason, and now he tore his Achilles, a terrible injury. Tore it on Sunday. He is out for the season, and we're sort of back to where we were before he came back with this sort of makeshift unit. So I want to get your take on it. A lot of people have been asking me what to do with Alfred Blue. What about Chris Polk? Jonathan Grimes, is he worth anything? So I want to ask you, obviously the big thing to get to first is the situation. How do people approach this? What guys are worth owning? Are there any worth starting? What to do now with this Houston backfield?
Mm-hmm. For the Houston backfield, honestly, if you have to own a piece of that backfield, the only player I'm considering rostering is Alfred Blue. I think he's probably their best overall running back. He's been pretty inefficient on the ground, though. Last year, he ranked, I think, the 38th or 39th out of 43 running backs with at least 100 carries based on our net expected points metrics. And then this year, he's done a little bit better in that metric. The problem is the Houston offense is just so pass-heavy whenever Arian Foster is in the game. And I think that they're just going to continue to throw the ball, lob it at DeAndre Hopkins as much as possible, Nate Washington. So I don't even know if they're going to get the opportunity to make Alfred Blue kind of that high-volume back that you need to get the point. If they're falling behind in the game, they might go to the pass a lot more and get Chris Polk in there. But talent-wise, other than his pass-catching abilities, I'm not too high on him either. And I'm sure we'll get to this later in the show, but there's a number of running backs that I'd rather claim after, week 7's gone down that I would rather have over Alfred Blue or Polk.
Yeah, I would think out of those two, you look at Polk, and he's sort of more of that pass-catching running back. We saw a little bit of that, when Foster was down originally in the beginning of the season. It didn't do a lot to separate himself from the pack. And, again, we're back at this situation again, what to do. And it looks like sort of the same thing. Alfred Blue, like you said, it's not been very efficient. He had really one good week. But he also ran it 31 times, so you have to think, those stats may have been not as good on the surface as you think. Other than that, I think that when I crunched the numbers, he had been running like 3.2 yards a carry outside of that 1 week performance. So it's tough to trust anybody there. I told people, add Alfred Blue. Who knows? He looks to be the guy that at least is going to try and get the most touches too, so you never know what's going to happen. But I don't think any of them are worth rostering, or not rostering, but not starting. For me, it almost concerns me a little bit more about this passing game. Now we've seen, DeAndre Hopkins be matchup proof, but also these past 2 weeks we've had Arian Foster in there, where he's a threat that teams need to focus on or keep in the back of their minds. We saw Nate Washington have a really good game on Sunday. Do you think with they're downgrading the running game, I would think they're going to pass more. And when you actually look at it, Brian Hoyer has actually been doing pretty well. I think he has 11 touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. So that's something that I don't think anybody would have expected. But I'm curious, besides DeAndre Hopkins, do you think there's another wide receiver that emerges, whether it's Cecil Shorts, Jalen Strong, or even Nate Washington? Is there somebody, I guess this is sort of tying in a little bit with our waiver wire piece, but we'll talk about it, consecutively, back to back with it. Is there another wide receiver that you would consider adding in Houston with their expected jump and sort of how much they're going to pass?
I actually have a few claims in on Nate Washington this week, actually. He had a really good game, of course, in Week 7, but if you look at the 4 games that he saw significant playing time this year, he's seen 44 targets over those 4 games. That's if you're excluding, I think, Week 5 where he saw 12 snaps and no targets. So I think Hoyer's going to be looking at him a lot. And like you said, Hoyer's actually been doing pretty well. If you track where he's finished since Week 5, he's been the 10th best, the 5th best, and the 7th best quarterback in terms of fantasy football scoring those last 3 weeks. And according to our metrics, again, at Number Fire, he's been a top 12 quarterback in terms of efficiency based on net expected points. So I think you might find success with Washington, especially with all the attention rolling over to DeAndre Hopkins. That's going to open things up for the number 2 on the other side of the field.
Yeah, I would think that, DeAndre Hopkins is going to get even more attention. So it's going to sort of open up for somebody to break through. And we just happen to see Tony Washington had a really good game. So could he be the guy? A lot of people thought Jalen Strong, including myself, where at some point during the season he would sort of get the hang of it and he would separate the pack. But it doesn't look like it. He's going with the veteran in Nate Washington. So maybe we see that. But sort of moving on to staying in Texas, we saw. Again, we've dealt with this sort of situation where nobody knew going into the season what was going to happen in Dallas with their running back situation after they didn't pick up a running back besides, the guy I want to talk about. They didn't go out and sign like another running back. They didn't draft anybody. They didn't make a big game. They thought the guys we have will make it work. And then we go out and see Darren McFadden, a guy I actually really like this week. Not necessarily matchup-wise, but someone I really want people to get on their teams. We saw him go for over 100 yards this past weekend. Joseph Randall went down early with a back injury or a rib injury or an oblique injury. We don't know what it was, but he was a probable return. He never did return. So the way I interpret that is they just felt comfortable. We said, let's keep Joseph on the sides because Darren's got this. And now we see today, or I'm not sure if it was today or yesterday, Jerry Jones said, Darren McFadden start this week at running back. Do you think we finally have a clear picture? Do we think that there's finally a clear-cut lead running back in Dallas with Darren McFadden? What do you think about that?
I'm a little hesitant to crown Darren McFadden as kind of the clear-cut lead back in Dallas. I think there's 2 things that we can kind of conclude from this past week, though, is one, they're trying to find any excuse they can not to have Joseph Randall as their lead back. First, it was all the talk about Christian Michael and taking the reins off him. The problem with Christian Michael is that for some reason or another, despite all the talent, he hasn't been able to put it all together to earn those reps on the field. Come game time, he's been great when it comes to the measurables, the combine stats. He's looked great in college, but in the pros, he couldn't take over for Marshawn Lynch in Seattle. He comes to Dallas with kind of this great O-line, this great opportunity, a coaching staff that wants to give him a chance, and he hasn't seized that opportunity. And the other thing is, Darren McFadden looked great last week, but my issue is that, for the past 2, 3, or 4 years, he's just been one of the most inefficient runners in all of the NFL, and it's hard to shake that in just one game. I think he'll get every opportunity to hold on to that job. Whether or not he keeps it, though, that I'm not so sure about. But I think if there's a Dallas running back that I'm betting on right now, it would be Darren McFadden.
Yeah, I mean, and the way I thought about it, and this makes me think what it could have been. with Lance Dunbar, for example. Lance Dunbar, was really operating as that passing down back. And I think when he actually went down with the ACL injury, he had 54 yards rushing in like the second quarter. And so he was actually operating on both sides. So what could have been? But when he went down, I thought Darren McFadden, who had like 10 catches 1 week, would be that guy who would get all those looks in the passing game. But now we're seeing him, he got the obviously the most rushes, the most attempts. So I would have to think that they're going to give him a chance. And like you point out, he's been one of the most inefficient runners outside of his first 2 or 3 seasons where he did really well. And I think another thing is injury. You start using him more and more, is he going to get injured? He's going to get one of these muscle injuries or one of these soft tissue injuries like he always does, where it's a calf or a thigh or a hamstring, where it's going to affect him and it's going to be worse for him because that's how he is. But I would think, they're going to ride the hot hand. Not saying Darren McFadden is the savior that everybody's looking for, but considering what there is out there, I would think in terms of waiver wire, he's got to be one of my top ads this week. So sort of talking about another running back situation, there's actually 2 I want to talk about, but first we'll talk about out in Washington. A lot of people, especially in the Washington press, before this past weekend had panned Matt Jones with Chris Thompson being out to be have a really big week. And it turns out he sort of fell on his face a little bit. Not saying he had a bad game, but what the hype was, he didn't deliver. And Alfred Morris is borderline, I think I told you this earlier, borderline droppable. So maybe you have some answers for me. Maybe you can help me out, because I'm a Matt Jones owner. How do you approach the situation? Is Alfred Morris worth rostering? Is Chris Thompson going to be a threat? Is he even going to play soon? And is Matt Jones finally going to get the light switch turned on and finally start producing like we saw, some weeks?
Yeah, I mean, starting off with Alfred Morris, if you're in one of those leagues with a shallow bench, if you have established starters, and, we're at that point in the season where you want to start going for those home runs, you want to find that C.J. Anderson, right, that gets you over the top, that helps you win your championships. I would really consider dropping Alfred Morris if you don't have anyone else to drop, to start, making these claims on these hot ticket items, like you said, like a Darren McFadden, because I don't think Alfred Morris is going to get you anything more than, a low ceiling 50-yard game from now on. And, I was actually very high on Matt Jones going into this season, in the preseason, based on 2 things. One was just how great Matt Jones looks in college. He's this great size speed freak, right? Moves in a way that you wouldn't expect from someone of his size. I think he's, north of 230 pounds. And he just moves with agility and speed that you would expect from a scat back. And the other thing that I realized is if you start to track Alfred Morris's production since his rookie year even, again, using our net expected points metrics at Number Fire, his efficiency on the per rush attempt basis has gone down every single season to where now he's one of the least efficient runners in the league. So that there was talent on Matt Jones' side, opportunity with kind of a decrease in playing ability on Alfred Morris's side. And I think that still holds true. I think we have to remember that Matt Jones is a rookie. He's been getting sporadic playing time here and there, but he has flashed those really great games also that shows his upside. So if I'm betting on a back in Washington, it's going to be Matt Jones. There is a little bit of a caveat in that Matt Jones might lose some of that passing down work to Thompson, who's been a great pass-catching player of the backfield. But other than that, I think Jones has the highest upside of everyone in Washington.
Yeah, I was thinking, I got to agree with you. Matt Jones has got to be the guy with the most upside for the rest of the season. But I think I told you this before the show started. Chris Thompson, or even just a few seconds ago, Chris Thompson is sort of a guy. Is he going to sort of when he is active, if he does come back, is he going to be sort of a nuisance where he's going to take away looks or touches from Matt Jones? And because he has done pretty well, and then he got injured. And I guess the notable thing is that when he got injured, he injured his back, and his injury to his back was actually something that he suffered in college, and people thought, he was going to be, he almost retired. So how serious of an injury is this? Didn't play last weekend, no status. So I really think that if there's a guy, Matt Jones is the guy. Alfred Morris is sort of that old reliable that you had, but he's not proven it anymore. He's in a contract year, so you would think that he would do more, but it's clearly seen that Washington's ready to move on from him and sort of give the reins to Matt Jones. So sort of a newer situation, and I know you and I talked a little bit, and we're not sure what to make of this yet, but I would think it can't get worse than what it was. The Lions announced, I think it was either today or yesterday, they fired their offensive coordinator, Joe Lombardi, who, came over with a lot of hype, especially in fantasy football. He's going to make, Stafford a really good quarterback, a really efficient one. He's going to make Calvin Johnson even more deadly. And this season we haven't seen much of that. Stafford's been consistent. Their run game has been really, really suffering. And really the only person that's been doing well is Calvin, who's come on a little bit late. But I would think that most people are going to wonder more than anything, does this firing affect the running back situation? Joyke Bell, obviously, I don't even think he's worth rostering at this point. He's not doing much. I don't think he's even playing anymore. But Amir Abdullah came in with a lot of hype, did really well week one, and then he's just sort of not done anything or anything worth starting him. And then, obviously, Theo Riddick, the passing down back, who really came off to a hot start, was even leading all running backs in catches. I don't think he is anymore. He's sort of been just cruising along, nothing outstanding. So the way I see it is it can't get much worse. It can only get better. The question is, how much better? Do you have faith that Amir Abdullah could still turn it around?
That's a kind of $1 million question in Detroit, right? It's I feel like part of the firing might be seeing the success in Miami. You fired potentially the problem, and you wake up the offense. It's kind of a wake up call to the team. In Detroit, it'll be interesting because we're going from Lombardi, who's a first time offensive coordinator, I believe, to now they've promoted, I believe, Cooter, who will also be a first time coordinator, and it'll be hard to know what their plans in terms of usage in the backfield is. I think we know that Joyke Bell's pretty much done in that backfield. And most of the touches should be going to Amir Abdullah, who's had fumbling issues, but once again, he's still a rookie. Hopefully that he can improve on that like he did when he was in college. And Theo Riddick's been solid as a pass-catching back. Your question, though, is, what type of identity is this offense going to take? We know that this offense has playmakers in the passing game. They can throw it to Calvin Johnson. They can throw it to Golden Tate. Eric Ebron starting to emerge. Whether or not they'll leverage that to kind of open things up for the running game, get their running backs more in space, like Abdullah, to get things moving on that side of the ball. That's kind of something that we'll have to keep an eye out for in kind of the first week without Lombardi. Another question is whether Caldwell will kind of, start to take more control of the offense now that Lombardi's no longer there. Caldwell was a pretty good offensive mind. He coached Kane Manning, helped lead the Colts to the Super Bowl when he was in Indy, and he did some great work with Joe Flacco in Baltimore. So, I think with this kind of Lombardi, it at least gives Detroit a chance to fix the things that have been going on. Whether or not they will, that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, we saw what happened with, Joe Philbin being fired, and look what's happened in Miami. I guess that's the best thing we can look at right now. That's the best case scenario. We're seeing Lamar Miller. He just went off on Sunday. Had a terrific game, 236 yards from scrimmage, 2 touchdowns, and the kicker is it was only in the first half. He did not play the second half. So you just have to think, hopefully this is something we see. And like you point out, great point, Jim Caldwell was doing really well in Baltimore as a offensive coordinator, and that's how he got the job in Detroit, and we can only hope that will sort of rub off. Jim Bob Cooter, though, that's a hell of a name.
Yeah.
So the last thing I wanted to sort of talk to ask your opinion about is, coming off the bye now, we have the Packers playing, of course, Sunday night with Denver, a really tough defensive matchup for Green Bay. We've seen, going into the bye in Week 6, we saw Eddie Lacy play, I think, 4 touches or 4 snaps or something like that, and Gene Starks just took over. And then we've also seen Randall Cobb also struggle a little bit. He admitted that the shoulder injury he suffered in the preseason may affect him all season. So I wanted to ask, this might even be the billion-dollar question, if Amir Abdullah is the $1 million question. Can we expect Eddie Lacy and Randall Cobb with a week off to sort of get back together, maybe nurse any injuries that they're dealing with, Cobb's shoulder, Eddie Lacy's ankle maybe? Do you think that everything will be fine in Green Bay and for fantasy owners at any point, if maybe not this Sunday, with Lacy and with Randall Cobb?
I think in terms of this Sunday, this might actually be a good week to fade all of the Green Bay offense, just because Denver's defense has just been so great. They rank number 1 according to our metrics in terms of overall defense as well as defense against the pass. So Aaron Rodgers is going to have a tough time throwing against perhaps one of the best secondaries in the league. Chris Harris Jr. is shut down. Aqib Talib has been shut down. And then he's also facing a pretty tough pass rush with some great outside linebackers. Shaq Barrett did awesome last week with a couple of sacks. They have Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware. So it's going to be a really tough game for Cobb and Lacy to bounce back from. And like you said, Starks is really earning a role in that backfield. And he's shown in place of Lacy a couple of times that he does have talent. So until Lacy is fully 100%, which hopefully is soon, Starks has shown that he can carry the load. And I think even when Lacy is healthy, I think Starks has made a big enough impression on the coaching staff to, be the 1B to Lacy's 1A. In terms of Cobb, I think if there's going to be a bounce back, I'm looking at Cobb as a lead receiver. He has Aaron Rodgers as quarterback, so we're going to find a way to get him the ball. Hopefully his shoulder injury has gone away by now, but it's going to be a really, really tough matchup this week against Denver.
Yeah, you would think, the week that everybody hopes that everything's fine in Green Bay and their first-round picks and Lacy and Cobb are fine, but then, of course, you face arguably the toughest defense in the NFL, especially for fantasy output, where they've just shut down running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers. So who knows? Hopefully, I don't own any of them, so hopefully it's just nobody I face that actually gets them going again. But you'd have to think there are a lot of people hoping that they turn around real quick. And obviously, like you said, Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback. At the end of the day, that's the big thing. If Aaron Rodgers is in there, you're gonna have a better shot of your fantasy stars in Green Bay doing better than not.
Exactly.
Sort of transitioning a little bit. Yeah, definitely. That's the ultimate thing. Sort of transitioning though into we talked a little bit about waiver wires, who to pick up, who not to. I guess I'll start with him. I didn't really talk about him a lot because he's been injured, coming off that bye with Green Bay. But it looks like he's ready to come back. Devontae Adams. I read somewhere today that he actually has been very efficient when he was targeted, when he was playing. He's been down with the ankle injury. appears to be poised to come back after a 4 or 5 week absence. Devontae Adams, do you think, even though James Jones has stepped up, Ty Montgomery has stepped up, do you think Devontae Adams is still worth rostering and even potentially, starting, maybe not this week, but, in weeks to come?
I think he's definitely worth a speculative add. The reason being, if Cobb isn't right, he could step in and kind of play that role also for the Packers. The one thing that I'm worried about in terms of his role in Green Bay, though, is the number of red zone targets and touchdowns going to James Jones. That's actually something I wrote about when the Packers signed James Jones, is if he's going to take production away from Devontae Adams, it would be in the red zone, because Aaron Rodgers and James Jones just have that level of trust when they get near the opponent's goal line. But like I said, Devontae Adams is a great. Just based on one, his talent, he's a very good, very efficient wide receiver, and second of all, like we said earlier, Aaron Rodgers is his quarterback, and really, you can't go wrong having a wide receiver on the receiving end of Aaron Rodgers. He's going to find a way to move the ball, get his team opportunities to score, and it's one of those, everyone benefits from it.
Yeah, definitely, and we've seen Aaron Rodgers in the past be able to keep 3 wide receivers relevant, even last year, or not last year, but when, James Jones was originally with the Packers, him, Jordy Nelson, maybe I think it was a little bit even Greg Jennings when he was there, maybe, or that might be too far back, but even, Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, and then James Jones. So he's proven he's able to feed his wide receivers enough to keep them, I guess, fantasy relevant. Maybe he does care about our fantasy teams. But I would think, he wasn't going to play until he's 100%. So I would think he's going to come back. He's going to be near 100%, if not all the way. And Ty Montgomery, I think, was hurt going into the bye week, or he had suffered an injury. So that would only help, I guess, Devontae Adams' case. But so obviously, you know me. I live in Massachusetts. I live in New England. So it would be wrong for me not to bring up this guy, Brandon LaFell. Obviously, didn't have the best of weeks. Two catches out of 8 targets, and some say he dropped all 6. Official stats say he dropped 3. But it's still not a good look, whatever it was. We saw Brandon LaFell really come on last season as their deep threat. I think he finished in the top 20 or 25 in terms of scoring for wide receivers. So firmly on that wide receiver 2 level. And obviously coming back from that foot or ankle injury did not look very impressive. And a lot of people already given up on him. I know I tell people to give him a week, don't start him. But there are some people already giving up and dropping him. So for me, I want to say this. Brandon LaFell is still worth somebody owning, I think. Would I start him this week? No, I don't think I would. But I would think, in the leagues that someone did drop him, I would try and get on that. You would expect that as he gets into the groove, he can put up the sort of production we saw from him last season, where he's that deep threat. You have almost basically the same offense in New England. You have Deion Lewis playing sort of a Shane Vereen role with a little more running, and then LeGarrette Blount, Julian Edelman, Gronk, Amendola thrown in there. So I would think that's going to be a similar offense. So that's why I think that Brandon LaFell will eventually start returning fantasy value to its owners that stuck in there for him. So that's a guy for me. I want to ask you, who, if you had to name one guy that you want people to add this week, any position, who would it be and why?
If it was one guy, any position, and I'm looking at right now ESPN ownership percentage rankings. There's a couple of names that I've had that are owned in 50% or more leagues that I'll exclude from this right now. But right now, sitting at I think 42% ESPN leagues before waivers clears, Stephon Diggs. If he's out there in your leagues, pick him up. I think he's the top wide receiver in Minnesota. He had 69 targets for 108 yards and a touchdown last game. 2 weeks ago, actually, I wrote that he was the top waiver wire ad then also. I think he was far less owned at that point. But, he's one of the most efficient wideouts in the league right now. I believe his numbers have him in the top 10 among all wideouts, better than DeAndre Hopkins, better than Julio Jones. And he's really been off to a hot start despite the fact that, unlike the players in Green Bay, his quarterback is Teddy Bridgewater, who I believe is the third least efficient quarterback, according to our metrics at Number Fire, of all quarterbacks with at least 100 dropbacks for the season. So the fact that he's producing despite his quarterback situation should tell you something. And I was actually talking to Matt Harmon about this, who writes for NFL.com, does the Backyard Banter, also does really great analysis. And I was asking him, does he remind you a little bit of Jarvis Landry? And he agreed to me with me to some extent, given one that says in talent level, and just the way that they kind of will go after the ball. I think if you saw Stephon Diggs' touchdown, it was a thing of beauty. The guy, leaped, stretched out, so he just went after the ball. I didn't think he was going to catch it, and somehow he came down with the touchdown. And that type of talent warrants, not just the playing time and the targets he's been getting, but it warrants being featured in that offense. And with defense is still having to worry about Adrian Peterson, I think that gives him enough breathing room to continue to succeed despite being a rookie and despite starting the year down the depth charts behind Wallace, behind Charles Johnson.
Yeah, a lot of people thought going into the season, I was one of them, that Charles Johnson would be this next coming. He would be the Messiah. And he wasn't. And then he got hurt, and then Mike Wallace has not put up the numbers we thought he would. Considering how he still put up decent numbers, considering that he and Ryan Tannehill didn't get along in Miami and even back in his Pittsburgh days. But Stephon Diggs, you think about him, he's sort of that deep threat. That's what he was when he came out of college. He was that kick returner, deep threat sort of thing. And he's proven to be an efficient, not slot receiver, but maybe short route over the middle type of guy who's able to make yards after the catch or get open in space. Not some deep threat you can just hurl up to and he can grab that. Not saying he can't do that, but he's been more than that. I don't know if you listened. I don't know if you looked at many of my tweets, Joe, but I'm prepared to call him the Gary Barnidge of wide receivers. And for everybody listening, thanks, Mom. I love Gary Barnidge. I think Gary Barnidge is I don't know. I think he's gold, and I think he saved my life, and I love him. But no, I like him that much, and I have a serious fantasy crush on Gary Barnidge. So I think putting him up there is pretty lofty. But yeah, Stephon Diggs has really put up good numbers, and I can't see him not. So that's a really good. It's strange how he's not owned that much. It really is. That I think in Yahoo he's owned in only like 70% of leagues. Now, granted, 70% is still every 10 leagues there's 7 leagues that own him, but that's still it should be 100%, and even lower in ESPN. That's baffling. So I talked about a guy coming into this week who had a decent game last night, especially on a really good end-around play where he ran for like 43 yards. And this is sort of more of a deeper sort of guy, but someone's got to step up, and I think this is the guy who's done it. And I can't believe I'm saying this considering what we've seen out of him in the past, but I think Ted Ginn Jr. is someone worth looking at to roster on your teams. Somebody's got to step up in Carolina. There are Panthers fans clamoring to get Steve Smith back. But they really need somebody. And I think Ted Ginn at least has proven out of the bunch to be the best weapon for them. Not saying much, but I think he's still the guy. If anybody Devin Funchess has not been the guy we had hoped. Jericho Cotchery didn't do anything. Philly or Corey Brown, whatever you want to call him, has still not done much. Ted Ginn Jr., they're trying to find ways to put him in the game and find ways to give him the ball. So I think, and I'll ask your opinion about it real quick, but I think out of the bunch, Ted Ginn Jr. is the guy to own. And I think in some deeper leagues and some deeper benches, he's worth a roster spot. So real quick, what do you think about him?
I actually like Ted Ginn Jr. He's been on my watch list for a while. I think I rostered him at one point when I need some help at my wide receiver 3 position. He's pretty much the next receiver after Greg Olsen in that offense. I need someone else to step up next to Olsen. And Cam Newton seems to like him. There was that one game in Tampa Bay, I think he caught 2 passes, but both of them went for touchdowns. And then even against Philadelphia, who has a very underrated pass defense, he saw 8 targets against them. He didn't do much with those targets with the 5 for 59 number, but the fact that he's getting those targets is pretty encouraging. So I completely agree with you. If there's a Panthers wide receiver to own, definitely go after Ted Ginn Jr.
I'm glad to see I'm not too crazy yet, but it's good to hear. So I just want to ask you real quick, one more guy you could tell me. Give me something here. Give these listeners at home, who's another guy that you'd recommend grabbing this week that we haven't talked about? Maybe at the quarterback position, maybe at the tight end position. We haven't talked about them too much. So maybe in those 2 positions, who's somebody that you would tell people to target?
Well, in terms of quarterback and tight end, I don't think these guys are available in all leagues, but I think in about 20% of leagues, Tannehill and Barnage are still available. So if they're there, definitely take them up. But in more competitive leagues, where they're probably sitting on someone's roster, at the quarterback position, I'm looking at Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's about 30% owned both in ESPN and Yahoo. And the reason I like him is, one, he has a pretty favorable schedule. He has a nice matchup with Oakland. I think he's going to be a top 10 quarterback this week, going against that secondary. And two, he has weapons around him. Chris Ivory, assuming that he's healthy and his quad issues don't hold him out. They have a nice running game to kind of establish that tempo. They have a good defense to keep the opposing offense off the field. And he has Brian Marshall and Eric Decker, who are 2 very, very talented wide receivers at his disposal. At the tight end position, likely very low owned because of his concussion issues, but Jordan Reed is pretty much the lead wide receiver in Washington. And we saw it again this past week. His first game back from his concussion, he had 11 of 13 targets for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the important thing to note is on that game-winning drive when Kirk Cousins had to make completions, had to make throws, had to hit that touchdown, he looked at Jordan Reed time and time again, and the defense knew it was going to Reed, and he had to make some tough catches, and he came through in the clutch, and I think that's only going to continue to happen as the season progresses. And Reed is up there with almost any other tight end not named Gronkowski on that list, to be honest, just because of opportunity and skill level. With a little asterisk, granted that he stays healthy, which is far from certain given the number of games he's missed the last few years. And I think, if he had stayed healthy, I don't think, having Jordan Reed as a top 3, top 5 tight end would be a question to anyone.
Yeah, I wrote about him today, actually, and that came out today, mostly because of his low ownership. Like you said, he's been out the past 2 weeks with that concussion. He's suffered concussions before. So, and he's always injured. So people thought, we're not going to see him again, or he's not going to play for 6 weeks. Let's drop him. Came back after 2 weeks, and look what he does. 13 targets, 11 catches, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Deshaun Jackson, who knows what's going on with him? I really think that, he's the Brashad Perryman type, where he's got the slowest healing hamstring in the world. Now, granted, nobody ever really knows what happened to him in terms of the extent of the injury. Who knows when he's going to play again, which only makes it easier for Jordan Reed to keep putting up great numbers. And like you said, the only thing is, if he stays healthy, which is a big if, it's nothing certain. One guy I wanted to ask you about, and this is somebody I advocated to sort of pick up in my piece today for Razzball, but Tyrod Taylor has been out the past 2 weeks, sprained MCL, and they're going into a bye now. But before that, he was a top 5 quarterback in terms of fantasy output. They expect him to play after the bye, which will be week 9. But is he someone worth owning as even a quarterback right now? Or are you worried that he won't be the same when he comes back?
Oh, absolutely. Love Tyrod Taylor. If he's out there, just grab him, stash him on your bench. I actually own him in, I think, 2 or 3 leagues where, I've been putting him on my IR slot, freeing up a roster spot whenever he's been called out. But the reason I love Tyrod Taylor is, first of all, his consistency. If you look at the number of quarterbacks that have put up top 12 performance, in the 5 games he's played, he's put up 3 top 12 performances, which is, I believe, the 4th most among all quarterbacks. And then not to mention that, surprisingly, if you look at our efficiency metrics, our passing expected points per drop back, he actually ranks in the top 12, which isn't something that you would have expected coming into the season. I think if you ask me, what's Tyrod Taylor's value on the Bills, it's his ability to run the football, get yards on the ground, not necessarily be able to do it, but he showed, especially against New England, when he had to, put up yards and points against Tom Brady, that when pressed to do it, he's able to produce. And, this is on a team where Sammy Watkins hasn't always been healthy, or now Percy Harvin's been hurt. Charles Clay has stepped up in the receiving game for them, and he still had LaShawn McCoy coming on the backfield as someone to throw to also. So he has some weapons around him, and he's done well in the kind of limited players in the pass catching game. And yet he's still been like you said, a top 5 quarterback before getting hurt.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. So I'd recommend getting him wherever you can, even though he's going into a bye. So we got to, I guess, sort of speed through this a little bit. We talk too much, and that's what happens in fantasy football. We talk so much that we have hardly enough time to cover everything because there's just so much to talk about. We're going to go into our start sets now. I'll go first just to show, in case you aren't familiar with how we do it. So what we'll do is we'll go through each section, so starts and then sits. We'll go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and then tight end. So I'll start. So the quarterback I want people to start this week, coming off a bad game, is Matt Ryan, actually. 22 of 38, 251 yards, 1 touchdown against 2 interceptions against Tennessee. Has a really good matchup, though, facing Tampa Bay. Over the past 3 weeks, on average, they've given up the most points to quarterbacks. And this is the averages the past 2 games that Tampa Bay has given out. 310 yards, 3.5 touchdowns, and only a half of an interception. I think if this is the week where he bounces back, it's got to be this week. You're going to see them. I really think you're going to see Atlanta overwhelm this offense, or overwhelm this Tampa Bay defense, I should say, with Devontae Freeman in the running game, Julio Jones, maybe Larry Hankerson, who knows? But Matt Ryan, if this is a game where he bounces back and has a really good week, a top 8 week, I think this is the week. So what about you? Who's that quarterback that you'd recommend starting this week for people?
I think my one recommendation for quarterback would be Phillip Rivers. A little risky because he's going into Baltimore, I believe, so it's always that West Coast East strip that kind of slows down some quarterbacks. But it looks like Phillip Rivers this season has just been insane. The guy seems matchup proof. To throw a couple of numbers out at you, in terms of fantasy points per game and scoring leagues, he ranks 4th with 21.5 points per game. He's 2nd in terms of 20-plus point games this season with 4. And in terms of, top 12 games, he's had 5 out of the 7 games have produced a top 12 performance. And in terms of top 6 performances, 3 out of the 7 have been a top 6 game. And in terms of being matchup-proof, his best game actually came against the Green Bay Packers pass defense, which ranks as the ninth most efficient defense according to our metrics at Number Fire, and he put up a 500-yard, 2-touchdown game against them. And beyond that, though, he gets the Baltimore Ravens secondary, who gives the second most points to quarterbacks in the league. So I think he's going to have a field day. Whether or not Gates is healthy, that's a question mark, but Ladarius Green stepped up. Keenan Allen is just absorbing tons of targets, catches, and yards. I think right now he leads the league in catches at 62, which is quite amazing given that he had a few bad games in the middle of the season. And Danny Woodhead is actually the most efficient receiving running back in the league right now among all running backs with at least 50 targets. So I really like Philip Rivers this week.
Yeah, that's really good to hear because I have him in like 3 of my money leagues. So good to hear. But moving into the running back, this is a guy who I said weeks ago was not startable. He was somebody that really hadn't been doing much, and now I'm telling people to start him this week. That's Jonathan Stewart. Coming off a 24 attempts for 125 yards game against Philadelphia. That's over 5 yards a carry. Facing Indianapolis, who've given up on average the past 3 weeks the second most points to running backs in standard leagues. They've given up on average the past 3 games 123 yards rushing and 1 1/3 touchdown. So that's 369 yards and 4 touchdowns in the past 3 games to running backs. And Stewart has had at least 78 yards in the past 2 games, and he scored 2 touchdowns in 2 games. That was last week. But he went out and faced, Seattle. He went out and faced, Philadelphia, and he somehow is still putting up numbers. And Carolina's still undefeated. So I have to believe that Jonathan Stewart is still capable of putting up even more, good numbers. And I love this matchup this week, especially with Indianapolis just really struggling right now, especially after they lost to New Orleans. So I got to go with Jonathan Stewart this week. What about you? Who is that running back that you tell people to start this week?
This seems kind of obvious, but for me, again in a great matchup for another week in a row, Todd Gurley. Get him in every single lineup if you play DFS. Make sure he's rostered in all your lineups there. Also, he plays against the San Francisco 49ers, who just looked done. And to top things off, the Niners are giving up, I believe, the 5th most points to running backs in the league. And they're, bottom 5 run defense also. And given the fact that the Rams are favored by, I think, 8.5 points in this game, it should be one of those games where the Rams go out to the lead. And, Jeff Fisher will just feed the rock consistently to his work back Todd Gurley. I think, Fisher's been waiting for Gurley to come back to the scene so that he can run heavy style offense through him, and we're seeing kind of the the fruits of that approach. And I think Todd Gurley is one of those players that can just pick yards in bunches. Also, I think after the first quarter of last week's game, he had like -2 yards, and then he ends up with 120 plus yard, 2 touchdown game. So he's one of those guys that for me is a top 5 running back already. And then for as a less obvious play, I also like Charkandrick West, who has a great matchup against Detroit. Again, we'll see what if this team kind of responds to the firing of Lombardi or not. But on the defensive side, again, this is a team that ranks in the bottom 10 in terms of rushing defense, according to our metrics, and I think that's also a nice play if Todd Gurley seems a little too chalky for everyone.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, both plays really good matchups this week. So we're actually running up against the clock, so we gotta speed up a bit. Again, we talk so much that we just love it so much, but we gotta go a little faster so we can make sure we get everything in. So my start wide receiver this week is Jeremy Maclin. Did not play last week, was cleared of a concussion, passed all the tests, and then he just ended up not playing. Facing Detroit, giving up the 4th most points on average the past 3 weeks to wide receivers in standard leagues. They've given up 209 yards and 1 1/3 touchdowns to wide receivers over the past 3 games. Translates to 627 yards and 4 touchdowns. They are without Charles, so you can expect them to run or pass a little bit more, which will help Macklin get more targets. He should play this week, which only helps, him do better. Obviously they're not playing, but I think this could be a really good week for him where, Detroit is exposed against wide receivers and, obviously that run game isn't as efficient. Not to say it's not good, but it's not as efficient without Charles there. So, Jeremy Macklin this week. What about you? Who's that wide receiver that you tell people to start this week?
I think in terms of wide receiver, I'm looking at, again, Keenan Allen going back to San Diego. Pretty much, in the interest of time, exact same reasons that we love Phillip Rivers. We love the person that he's probably going to be throwing the ball to, especially if Gates is out. Keenan Allen's going to see a ton of targets, and I think he's going to find a lot of success against that leaky Baltimore Ravens secondary.
Yeah, definitely. That's just the Baltimore team as a whole has just not been doing that well. So going into the tight ends, I would think this is a little more obvious this week. Jason Witten is the guy I'd recommend starting this week. Coming off a 73-yard performance against New York, facing Seattle, they've given up the most points to tight ends over the past 3 weeks on average. They've given up, this is an average stat line. This will be, I guess, the only thing I have to really say. They've given up 8 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown on average the past 3 weeks to tight ends, which is a really good line for tight ends. So I would just say, start Witten wherever you got him. Really good matchup, and, with the lack of targets or people to throw to in Dallas, Witten is even more appetizing. So for me, Jason Witten this week. What about you, Joe?
For me, we talked about him earlier, but Gary Barnidge, I think people are calling him Barnkowski, and it's less so much about his matchup and more so about what he's actually done in the past 5 weeks. I think he's either scored a touchdown or gone 100 yards receiving in each of the last 5 weeks when he's really been used a lot in the passing game, and not to mention that I believe according to our metrics, he is the most efficient tight end in the league right now, better than even Gronkowski. So he's one of those guys, if you think he's a flash in the pan, absolutely not. Go ahead and get him in all your lineups.
Yeah, definitely. I love Gary Barnidge, so you're never going to hear a disagreement from me about that. So moving into our sits this week, and really my sit team, the people at the positions I tell people to sit, is like an all-star team. So we'll start at the top. Andrew Luck is the quarterback. I want people to sit this week. Had a rough week. Now, he did well in fantasy, but he had really a rough week in terms of football. 23 for 44, nearly 50% completion, 333 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions versus New Orleans. Going with Carolina, really tough matchup. On average, the past 2 games, they've only given up 222 yards, half a touchdown, and half an interception. So they've only given up 444 yards and a touchdown and an interception in the past 2 games. And one of the things is he's really been struggling with his decision-making. So that's really something that we could see Carolina exploit with this week with just that stellar defense that they have. So Andrew Luck, as much as people want us to play him, I tell people sit him this week. But what about you? Who's that quarterback you want sitting this week for people, Joe?
That's why I'm looking at matches, and Luck would probably be my top choice off the bit. Going off what we talked about earlier, I would also really consider benching Aaron Rodgers, actually. I don't think I've ever said that before. The reason is that he's playing the number 1 pass defense in Denver. And I know Green Bay's coming off a bye, but Denver's pass rush has just been incessant. Getting to the quarterback, not to mention, we have question marks about Eddie Lacy in the backfield. We have question marks about Brandon Cobb's shoulder, whether or not he's fully healthy. And they have shutdown corners. I can really see Green Bay struggling to move the ball against Denver this week.
Yeah, we're telling people to sit the 1 and 2 projected quarterbacks in fantasy football coming into the season, so we must be crazy or something. But going into my running
back, it's been a crazy year in quarterback.
It really has, and you wrote about that, so make sure you check that out on Number Fire. check out Joe's article. But in terms of running backs I want to sit this week, that's Latavius Murray. Coming off a really good performance against San Diego. I told people to start him last week. Ran for 85 yards and a touchdown against San Diego. Facing the Jets, though, they've given up the fewest points on average the past 3 weeks to running backs. In the past 2 weeks, they've given up 21 rushing attempts for 34 yards. That's it. No touchdowns. They've only given up, in terms of combined yardage, 105 yards and no touchdowns overall. I just really think this is a tough matchup. Latavius Murray is a guy that, is starting to come on after coming off that bye, but he's got this really, really tough matchup. We saw LeGarrette Blount only run for -3 yards only. So I don't like him this week in this matchup. As much as I like him, I got to sit him this week. So what about you, though, Joe? Who is that running back you tell people to sit this week?
If I'm thinking running back this week, I would probably sit Carlos Hyde going against the Rams. First of all, they're on the road. And the Rams actually have, I think, the 6th most efficient rush defense going on our metrics. Beyond that, Hyde's shown that he's highly, highly game script dependent. I think he's averaging over 100 rushing yards per game in wins. In losses, it's closer to about 50, 60 yards. And, like I said earlier, I think the Rams are 8.5-point favorites in this game. They can control the ball with Todd Gurley. And I just don't think the opportunity to get Hyde the ball or have him on the field is going to be there this week.
Yeah, he's really been struggling since that Week 1 outburst. And I don't think he's a guy that really, especially in a tough matchup when he started. So really good point. So this week, I'm actually telling people to sit Des Bryant. He's expected to come back this week, but I'll tell you why he should not play on your fantasy team. Facing Seattle, given the second fewest points in the past 3 weeks on average to wide receivers. Coming off a major injury, Matt Castle's at quarterback, and no touchdowns have been allowed by Seattle in the past 3 games to wide receivers. Just don't like this matchup. If Des Bryant plays, he's not going to be 100%. He's going to get Richard Sherman. He's going to get all the coverage in the world because there's nobody else that can really play. Terrence Williams is not somebody that you can really trust to put up really good numbers. So Dez is going to get all the coverage if he plays. Don't like his matchup at all. With the worst quarterback, tough matchup, coming off a major injury, don't like him. But what about you? Who's that wide receiver, real quick, that you don't want people to start this week?
To me, I'm sitting Amari Cooper, and it sounds crazy because of the success Cooper's shown, especially against Jason Garrett against San Diego as a top cornerback. But he faces a very tough Jets defense, ranks 5th against the pass, and he's probably going to be on either against Revis or Cromartie. So, Cooper's someone I'm fading this week just based on that matchup.
Yeah, that Jets defense is just a really tough matchup. We saw Tom Brady do well against them, but that was with Danny Amendola and then, Rob Gronkowski and stuff like that. So it really is tough to trust anybody against that Jets defense. Like I said, sitting Latavius Murray. Quickly going through the tight ends we want to sit. We got about 90 seconds left. Jordan Cameron, facing New England. Got to mention New England. Giving up the second fewest points on average the past 3 weeks to tight ends. He's a non-factor in a blowout game, which makes me concerned because he is it was a blowout, and he only got 2 catches on 2 targets. They're very run-heavy, and New England hasn't given up any touchdowns to tight ends in the past 3 games and under 100 yards combined in the past 3 games. So sit Jordan Cameron this week. What about you, Joe, real quickly? Who is that tight end that you want people to sit this week?
This week, I'm probably going to sit Kyle Rudolph of anything, mostly because of opportunity. He's gotten a couple of touchdowns, but, he's one of those risky plays where if he doesn't get those red zone looks, he's not going to get you value at the position, especially with, like we said, Diggs emerging as a target for Bridgewater, who hasn't been very effective himself. I think it's someone that you're going to have to sit.
Yeah, he's someone that you really can't trust on a week-to-week basis, so I like that pick. We got 30 seconds left, so I want to just run through a few things real quick. Thank you for coming on, Joe. It was a pleasure. You brought a lot of insight into it. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at _scientist on Twitter. Make sure you follow Numberfire if you're not already on Twitter. Make sure you follow the Nickel Press at Nickel Press Show. Make sure you follow me, of course, on Twitter at DMoreNFL. Good luck this week, and we'll talk next week.